In May 2010, Jose Mourinho stood atop European football, tears streaming down his face as he embraced Marco Materazzi on the San Siro pitch. At just 47 years old, he had achieved the unthinkable, a continental treble with Inter Milan, becoming one of only 5 coaches to win the European Cup with 2 different clubs. The Portuguese tactician had already conquered England with Chelsea and was destined for Real Madrid, where he would surely add to his Champions League collection and cement his status as the greatest manager of all time.
I'm sorry, I'm a bit arrogant. We have a top manager. Again, please don't call me arrogant, because what I'm saying is true. I'm European champion, so I'm not one of the bottle. I think I'm a special one.
15 years later, that prophecy lies in ruins. The man who once called himself the special one has not lifted the Champions League since that magical night in Madrid. At Real Madrid, he failed to deliver European glory to a club that would go on to win 5 Champions League titles in the following decade. Meanwhile, Mourinho has endured a painful succession of dismissals, burned bridges, and public humiliations that transformed him from football's most admired coach into a cautionary tale of how quickly greatness can unravel. To understand the magnitude of Mourinho's fall, one must first appreciate the heights from which he tumbled. His 2010 Inter Milan side didn't just win the treble, they did it by dismantling the greatest Barcelona team in history. In the Champions League semi-final, with Inter reduced to 10 men and protecting a tight lead, Mourinho orchestrated one of the most tactically astute defensive performances ever witnessed. This made him one of 5 coaches to have won the European Cup with 2 clubs, and later that year, he was crowned the inaugural FIFA World Coach of the Year. His move to Real Madrid seemed a natural progression for a manager at his peak. Here was a club starving for European success, possessing unlimited resources, and a squad that included Cristiano Ronaldo, Kaká, and Sergio Ramos. Mourinho's mission was clear: end Barcelona's dominance and restore Real Madrid to their rightful place atop European football. At Real Madrid, Mourinho achieved domestic success, winning the La Liga title in 2011-2012 and breaking several domestic records for points, goals scored, and wins in a season. But Europe remained elusive. 3 consecutive Champions League semi-final defeats, including against his old nemesis Barcelona, left deep scars. At Real Madrid, we would for the first time see what would become a recurring theme in his eventual downfall: his players' trust in him. What had made him special was the brotherhood he created within his teams and their unwavering loyalty to him at Porto and Chelsea. At Real Madrid, this same trait became both his greatest strength and his biggest weakness. In the beginning, he effectively pushed the us versus the world mentality, fueling the fiercest rivalry in football history. The problem was that it all eventually came crumbling down. In one of the most aforementioned El Clásicos, subplots arose, one of them which enraged Mourinho. Real Madrid's starting XG had somehow been leaked to the press before the lineups were announced, spilling the beans that Pepe was going to start in midfield. Jerzy Dudek later recounted Mourinho's anger in his book, saying, "He came into the dressing room with a face like thunder and had a go at us because the press had found out that Pepe was going to start in midfield." "Where is the rat? Is it you, Granero?" Dudek claims Mourinho said. He insisted that there was a rat in the dressing room and said that he wouldn't stop until he found out who it was. Then he closed the door and left. He never found the conclusive truth and instead assumed that the mole was Iker Casillas, whose girlfriend at the time, Sara Carbonero, worked as a journalist. These allegations from Mourinho were never proven true and only served an unintentional purpose of causing severe consequential tension in the locker room, particularly after both Sergio Ramos and Pepe took Casillas' side in the eternal feud between Mourinho and Casillas. Casillas lost his place in the XG as a result. From the time he lost his dressing room, he lost the unquestionable loyalty of players, and with that, his days in Real Madrid were numbered. The new era problem, perhaps the most fundamental shift that undermined Mourinho's effectiveness, was the changing dynamics of power within football clubs. The players he had commanded at Porto, Chelsea and Inter were from a different generation, one that respected traditional hierarchical structures and responded to his demanding methods. I had to adapt to a new world, to what young players are now, I had to understand the difference between working with a boy like Lampard, who at that age of 23 was already a man, the new boys who at 23 are kids. Today I call them boys, not men, because I think that they are brats. This encapsulates the era when Mourinho's methods flourished. Players accepted his criticism, his mind games, and his absolute authority because they believed it made them better. This shift became painfully apparent during Mourinho's second Chelsea tenure and reached its low point at Manchester United. Players who once would have accepted public criticism now snapped at his methods. How many times do we hear on the news that a manager has been sacked because he lost the dressing room? This phenomenon became Mourinho's recurring nightmare. While Mourinho grappled with changing dressing room dynamics, football itself was evolving at breakneck speed. The tactical revolution that began with Pep Guardiola's Barcelona had fundamentally altered how football was played. High pressing, positional play, and attacking fluidity became the new orthodoxy. If there's one area he's tinkered with constantly over his career, it's central midfield. But Mourinho's attempt at adaptation often felt forced rather than organic. His defensive-minded, counter-attacking philosophy, so devastatingly effective in the 2000s, became to look antiquated against teams that could press with coordinated intensity and play through compact defensive blocks. Chelsea's pragmatism personifies Mourinho's ability as a master of preparation. He sees styles of play situationally and according to the opponent. However, the situational approach, while still tactically sound, increasingly appeared negative and outdated to players, fans, and club executives who had embraced the attacking philosophies pioneered by Guardiola, Klopp, and others. The game had moved beyond mere tactical battles to become a form of high-intensity entertainment, and Mourinho's pragmatic approach, no matter how effective, no longer aligned with modern expectations of how football should be played. The Manchester United debacle. Mourinho's tenure at Manchester United perfectly encapsulated all his emerging weaknesses. Despite winning the Europa League and League Cup in his first season, his time at Old Trafford became defined by public feuds with players, particularly Paul Pogba, and his inability to implement a coherent tactical identity. The United squad, filled with international stars and inflated egos, proved resistant to his methods. Players leaked training ground incidents to the media, questioned his tactics publicly, and essentially held the club hostage. The situation deteriorated to the point where the club felt they had no choice but to side with the players over their manager. This represented a complete reversal of power dynamics that had once made Mourinho so successful. At Porto and Inter, players would have died for him. At United, they were plotting against him. Beyond the tactical and political factors, Mourinho's decline can also be understood through a psychological lens. Success at the highest level requires not just tactical acumen, but also the ability to reinvent oneself continually. Mourinho's greatest strength, his unwavering self-belief, became his greatest weakness when it prevented him from adapting to changing circumstances. His famous declaration of being the special one was once a powerful psychological weapon that intimidated opponents and inspired players. But as failures mounted, it began to sound hollow, even delusional. The media, once charmed by his charisma, turned against him. The mystique that had been so carefully cultivated began to crumble under the weight of repeated disappointments. Even his more recent appointments at Tottenham and Roma have followed familiar patterns. Initial optimism gives way to tactical stagnation, player unrest, and eventual dismissal. His time at various clubs has become characterized by short-term thinking and an inability to build sustainable success. Jose Mourinho's decline is not just the story of one manager's fall from grace. It represents the end of an entire era in football management. The authoritarian approach that once dominated sport has given way to more collaborative, player-centric methods. Coaches like Guardiola, Klopp, and Ancelotti have shown that success in modern football requires emotional intelligence, tactical innovation, and the ability to adapt to an ever-changing landscape. Mourinho's legacy remains secure. His achievements at Porto, Chelsea, and Inter will forever be remembered as some of the finest in football history. But his inability to evolve with the times serves as a stark reminder that in football, as in life, adaptation is not optional, it is essential for survival. The special one became ordinary not because he lost his tactical acumen or his psychological insight, but because he refused to acknowledge that the game he once conquered had moved beyond him.